All right, so welcome to our first official book club. I have been hoping to start a book club since 2017 when I opened the clinic. So never give up on your dreams, people. um, I'm obviously kind of giddy, happy to be doing this. So, for me, I've had my own personal journey with healing my nervous system. And part of that is because I was diagnosed at age 16 with a lot of chronic illnesses, including chronic fatigue syndrome and IBS, whatever that means. Nobody knows what those diagnoses mean, right? And part of my journey from age 16 until now, when I'm 42, has been understanding how the nervous system and the immune system are so completely intertwined. We can talk about the nervous system in isolation, and we can talk about the immune system in isolation, but that really does us all a disservice. So, as we go through this book called Anchored by Deb Dana, we're going to talk a little bit about why. Why does it matter that we are healing from trauma, that we are healing the vagus nerve, that we are healing the nervous system? Why does that matter? And why do I care, right? Because I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm certainly interested in mental health, but I'm not an expert in those areas. I've just learned a lot through my own journey. So I'm just here to guide you through this book and to facilitate and create a safe space. But I am not here to necessarily teach. I'm just here to provide a safe container. I also want to add just some ground rules that we are going to do the best we can to be respectful of each other. So we, as after today, when you guys are talking more and contributing more, we're just going to try not to interrupt each other. I know it's hard if we have ADHD, but we're going to do the best we can. It's also hard on Zoom sometimes. But we're going to do the best we can. We're going to be kind to each other. Everyone is welcome. All spiritual beliefs are welcome, right? So we're going to just help people feel comfortable to be who they are. And I know and support and care about each of you. So I think this is actually going to be pretty easy. I think you guys are going to like each other. And I think we heal in community very, very differently and much faster than alone. So the goal with the book club idea was like, just help you all get to know each other a little better. Some of you have had similar threads to different parts of your journey. So I'm excited for you to get to know each other. Okay, the last couple ground rules are try not to offer advice to other people in the book club unless you're being asked for advice. One little trick I've learned with my teens is sometimes they just need to process out loud. Sometimes they need to vent a little bit. They get great clarity in being allowed to express themselves, and they are not looking for me to fix it, right? I think sometimes that's true in friendships too. So it's okay if we're going through this and there's a section about understanding something about the vagus nerve and you have a question and you're asking for a specific answer, right? But if you're just trying to process something that happened or the way you handled something, this is also going to be a safe space to talk through this. I think it's kind of nice that we're all women here because in general, we do need clarity by speaking things out loud a little differently than men. But of course, we honor the feminine energy in all of our male patients too, and anybody's welcome to join. Okay, and then the last thing in terms of ground rules is we are going to keep the things that we talk about in book club. We're going to try to keep those private to book club, right? So when you leave here, if I tell you my personal story of a specific trauma, I appreciate it. Well, I'm a little different because I'm an open book and I want you all to learn from me too. So you can share things about me, but specifically other members of the group. We're not going to go around our community talking about, oh my gosh, you know what so-and-so said in book club, right? We're going to try to keep it here because I do think that creates a little bit warmer and safer of a space here. And focus on being an active listener if you can. And And that's it in terms of ground rules. So before we kind of dive a little bit into the introduction of the book, I'm wondering who has the book? Did anybody get it yet? You don't have to have it yet. I'm just curious. Yay. Awesome. And does anybody prefer to listen or use Kindle, or does everybody here kind of like having the book? You can unmute yourself if you want.
I have it on Kindle because it was free on Kindle Unlimited.
I
I
have both. Oh, sorry.
I listen to it. I have the audio book.
I have both because I prefer to listen, but then I like to go and highlight certain things too. So
Makes sense.
Yeah, I decided to go back and get the audio version too for a car ride that I was doing, but then I realized I like the paper version a lot because then I can mark certain things. A little advice I have is, and you didn't ask for advice, but I'm giving it to you here for a second. The forward. The forward I don't like. You can read it if you want. And my English teacher in high school would hate that I'm saying this, but I would like you to skip the forward and go to the introduction. We can read the forward together at the end after, but it's a lot of technical biochemical advice. And some of it was over my head. And then it made me a little bit nervous that I wasn't going to understand the whole book. And then when I started the introduction, I saw, oh, she's using words that are a little bit more friendly to my nervous system here. So, it's up to you, but I recommend skipping the forward for now and we can read it later. And here's another way to interpret that is the forward is written by Stephen Porges, and he's the founder of this polyvagal theory. He invented it. He's made up this theory. It's just a theory, right? It still needs to be proven and tested. And he's a researcher. He has a PhD. And sometimes those people are very, very good at that one area of research, but that doesn't make them clinicians, right? Those people are often the people that are not working one-on-one with people. They're just doing the research. Deb Dana, the person who wrote the book and wrote the intro, she's a therapist, and she's been a therapist, I think, for 40 years. She's been working using the polyvagal theory since 2014, and she has a lot of insight into how to explain this in a way so that her clients and her patients understand the vagus nerve, right? There's been at least 100 books written about the vagus nerve in the last 20 years. Some of them are very helpful. Some of them I think are a little bit too like esoteric, like they don't give you practical tools that are helpful, which is great if that's what you enjoy reading. Nothing against that. But this book has a little bit of both, a little bit of background, but it like 80% of this is actually things that can help us right away if we're looking for a different way, a different approach to our healing. And I think what makes us special here and what makes you all amazing patients is that you are constantly looking at things from a different angle and staying open-minded and open-hearted. And that's really important because what we're missing, in my opinion, in conventional medicine is that approach, right? Of staying open-minded to, hey, we might not understand everything about the immune system yet. It turns out every 5 years we have a whole new approach to autoimmune diseases. So same thing with the nervous system. We have a lot to learn, and I think approaching it that way and just being open to new ideas is really great, because also what works for me today, like for example, when I was driving in this morning, instead of chanting today, I was doing like a sigh. We could try this if you all want. If you sit with your feet on the ground or you sit cross-legged, and just kind of ground yourself. This is a good time to pause and kind of center yourself and arrive here. So if you're willing, let's try to gently close the eyes, if that feels safe to you. If not, you can just kind of lower your gaze. And so when I was driving in this morning, I was practicing this sigh where you inhale, and then you inhale again at the top of your inhale, And then when you exhale, you let out whatever noise you want or whatever sigh you want to let out. So it sounds like this. You can try it if you want to. Inhale, inhale again if you can, and then exhale, let it out. And you can even just kind of like let your shoulders go with it. And you can do that once during the day. You can do it as many times as you want. There's no harm, right? The beautiful thing about trying to weave in some nervous system healing ideas in with your supplements or your medications or your medical regimen is that there's no side effects. Like there's no downside to trying a different way of breathing, right? We're going to talk a little bit though about how it is possible to do too much too fast. And sometimes with cognitive behavioral therapy, I do get feedback from patients where they tell me like, you know, maybe I found that therapist and things were going well the first 6 months, but then every time I went in, it was like we were reliving the trauma. We were talking about it over and over. It was actually really hard for me because my body felt like I was in it. Or some people are going right in for like EMDR or even psychedelic treatment for a specific trauma, and they can start to reorganize their nervous system and their memories of the event too quickly, and the body starts to panic when we do that because it's been in surviving for many years, usually a certain way to get you through something. And if you reorganize it too fast, it can feel a little bit like free falling. So I don't know if you all have heard of the Safe and Sound protocol, but Kelly Price, our wellness coach, who's in Korea on vacation right now, but she'll be back in a couple weeks. She is doing the Safe and Sound protocol with our patients. And one thing she talks about is actually doing like 4 to 5 minutes the first day, right? Because if you listen, you're listening to therapeutic music, but it can start to heal the vagus nerve in a way that feels disorienting to the system if you do too much too fast. The same can be true when we're using herbs to cure something like Lyme disease. I can give someone the perfect regimen, and 60 days later, I actually think the Lyme is gone, but their immune system is having a really, really hard time reprogramming, and they feel terrible because of it, because their immune system was surviving a certain way for 20 years, and now I've reorganized everything and they've crashed, right? It doesn't mean we did the wrong treatment. It means we did it at the wrong time or the wrong pace. Does that make sense a little bit? So it's a concept we've learned since we started this clinic 9 years ago, and it's been a hard lesson to learn because, if you personally, for example, have had Epstein-Barr since you were 18 years old and you're seeing me and you're 60 years old, it's really tempting to just want to fix things overnight, fix things really fast. Kate, can you just give me that medicine that'll make everything better? Yes, but the biochemistry of your body is in such delicate balance that the reason you're still here with us is because your immune system has compensated for this virus for a long time. So we almost need to reprogram your DNA of your immune system, which we can do, but we need to do it in a slow, steady pace for some situations. Not everything, but that does apply for a lot of us. I'm going to step back a little bit because I've used some words and some terms that she uses in the intro. The autonomic nervous system is often abbreviated the ANS. And so autonomic is similar to the word automatic. It could be called that. The idea when they discovered the nerves of the brain, the nerves of the body, including the brain and the spinal cord and all of the nerves that leave the spinal cord and innervate our organs and our skin so we can feel. All of the nerves we have in our body are part of the autonomic nervous system. And there was an incorrect belief in the beginning of modern medicine that we could not control the nerve signals. But thanks to research like the polyvagal theory and Stephen Porges and lots of other people. We now understand that everything's connected and we can actually control the nerve impulses. In fact, if I think a thought like, I am safe, I am cared for, I am loved, I am in a place where I can be myself, I'm not thinking the opposite. I'm not thinking like this is scary or I'm going to be made fun of or, feeling fear. If I'm feeling the opposite, if I'm actually thinking or saying out loud, I am safe, that actually changes my heart rate, right? It changes my respiratory rate, and different signals at a different rate are being sent to my adrenal glands. And so I think what's really cool about this is we have to acknowledge the power of our thoughts when we're talking about polyvagal theory and this book, because we know that the nervous system is not just automatic. And years ago, I was listening to an interview with Neil Patrick Harris, the actor, and Doogie Howser, the actor who played Doogie, if you guys are old enough. And he's on Broadway, and he was talking about one show he did had singing and dance numbers. He had like 8 of them in a row, right? And to do that kind of physical work, he was taught by a yogi how to leave the stage for 30 seconds and quickly slow down his heart and his breathing. And one of the tricks was getting his tongue to rest on the roof of his mouth and taking certain breaths. And I don't remember his whole talk. You can probably Google this interview. I think it was on Regis and Kelly way back then. But it was really interesting because what he was describing was actually polyvagal theory, but he was using it in his trade to bring his heart rate down, to bring his respirations down so that he was ready to go back on stage in 30 seconds for the next dance number. And he could sing because he needed to use his breath to sing, right? So I think that's an example of how we know our brain can control our cardiac rhythm as well as our respirations, and that is through the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve starts at the top of the tongue, the very back of the tongue, and it ends all the way at the pelvic floor, the perineum, the area of the body that we kind of neglect and don't talk about enough. And the nerve, the vagus nerve, actually has 2 specific branches. So there's 2 parts of the nerve, almost like it's really 2 nerves from the top, from the back of the tongue all the way down to the pelvic floor. So another great example of how I know and I've seen things are connected is a baby that's having constipation issues, having to do with the pelvic floor not being structurally in the right place, often has to do with them having a tongue tie. And so what we know is that if your tongue is tethered, if that little piece of skin under your tongue is too tight and too short, it really impacts digestion, but it also actually tethers the vagus nerve. So what happens is maybe it's only a millimeter, but the vagus nerve is being pulled taut and it's being pulled up because the tongue is stuck and the baby can't move the tongue the way they're supposed to. My now 12-year-old daughter, when she was born, she was tongue-tied. And it was so clear to me that there was something wrong, but I didn't know what. And there was no doctor or midwife or provider who understood this at the time, at least not enough to hear what I was saying. So I had to learn this on my own. But what happened was if we massaged her hard palate with our finger and gave her a nice little jaw massage, an internal mouth massage, and then she nursed, she would be able to have a bowel movement, right? And it's really important that babies are pooping just like adults, but babies need to poop when they're really little almost every time they feed in order to grow, right? So then she could have a bowel movement. But if we didn't do that and she ate and her tongue just kind of flopped around in there because her tongue was tethered, the vagus nerve was really stuck and she wasn't able to have a bowel movement. She also was stuck in what we would call fight or flight, but she was a newborn, right? So you could watch her almost writhing in pain. Unfortunately, she was my second kid. Plus, I'm a PA who examines babies, so I know that babies should not look like that, right? And she was in pain. She was screaming. She was just behaving in a way, like every 45 minutes she would start screaming. She was behaving in a way that didn't look like my other child who didn't have a tongue tie, right? So it was very clear to me that something was going on with the tongue tie that was actually affecting her ability to be calm, her ability to feel safe, and it was also greatly affecting her digestion and her gut. Um, and I think it's fascinating if you look, and I can pull up a picture of the vagus nerve, but if you look at all of the little nerves that branch off of the vagus nerve, you'll see that a lot of them go to the small intestine. And a lot of the branches of the vagus nerve are trying to help us with our digestion. I'm going to pull that up real quick. This is kind of like a dissection so you can see it. Here we go. Has anybody ever heard of the tongue tie thing? So here, over here on the right, if you can see this, and it's not too small, you can see these are the cranial nerves, and these actually come out of the vagus and then innervate the eyes, the salivary glands. So a lot of our patients have Sjogren's syndrome and they have very dry mouth, and some of that has to do with the vagus nerve not activating these salivary glands. You need the salivary glands to produce enzymes when you're chewing your food, or in the case of a baby, when you're just swallowing breast milk, in order to digest your food. And then here is actually, so I'm sorry, these are the cranial nerves up here, but here they're showing you the vagus. And the vagus nerve branches off, this would be like the base of the tongue. They've showed you a dissection. And then here is the heart, here's the lungs, here's the gallbladder, spleen. So there's branches of the vagus nerve going to each organ. And then the autonomic plexus is what we would consider the area that's typically around or near the digestive system. And here's the large and small intestine. And then down here is the rectum, the bladder, the gonads. And actually, they don't show you that it ends just above the cervix in a woman. But another great example of how we know the vagus nerve is not just automatic, that it's also controlled by our thoughts, is a woman in labor. We have a lot of research on the cervix has to open, the cervix has to dilate in order for the baby to come out. And if women are interrupted, if you go into the hospital room and turn on the lights and come in all mean and terrible bedside manner, the woman's cervix physically closes. And that's because the vagus nerve says, well, first of all, the woman thinks I'm not safe, right? What's going on here? And then the vagus nerve will physically activate fight or flight and the cervix closes. So now we have a problem with birth, right? Because we want the cervix nice and open. So when you think fear or when you feel fear, it directly affects these organs through the vagus nerve. And signals, hormones, as well as direct pathways from the brain all the way down to the pelvis are happening constantly, right? So, I do see a lot of adults that also struggle with constipation. Sometimes it's stress related. It's not just water and fiber, right? I think we generally accept that stress affects our health, but we don't always maybe dissect exactly why. So this is one of the ways, the vagus nerve is one of the ways that stress affects our health negatively. The other thing that I think is kind of interesting is this part of the vagus here, it gets smaller after many years of stress. So the nerve itself shrinks in size if you've had 20 years of trying to juggle being in a not supportive relationship, raising kids, working. If you are someone who's chronically stressed, your vagus nerve is going to get smaller in size. It's not permanent. We can fix it, but that's something to think about, that we have research from autopsy from people, and we can see that specific traumas and high stress situations actually cause the vagus nerve to shrink in size just from exhaustion just from overuse. The nerve itself isn't getting enough nutrients. It's basically like depleted, and then it gets smaller, and now it doesn't function right. And when you go to breathe, you feel shortness of breath, or when you try to make cortisol from your adrenal glands, you can't make enough cortisol because the nerve itself is not working correctly. I think I had one more example, and then I'll kind of open it up to some questions. Okay, we talked about tongue tie. Have you all ever heard of biofeedback, so biofeedback can help with blood pressure. I had an aunt in the 1980s who had high blood pressure. They said you have essential hypertension, right? The diagnosis they love to give, which means nothing. It means we don't know how you got it. But her blood pressure was like sitting at 150 over 100, so too high. And she couldn't tolerate any of the medications they tried. They gave her all different medications, and she had terrible side effects. And what she ended up learning in, I think, 1986, when she told me about it, was something called biofeedback. And biofeedback, as well as neurofeedback, but biofeedback's a little more specific for blood pressure, really helps people learn how to control their blood pressure. How does it do this? It does this through affecting the vagus nerve. That's one of the ways, right? But essentially, there's different mind tricks. There's different things you can do to remind yourself. Some people will try tapping. Some people will try counting. Remind yourself that you're safe. Get your mind off of the blood pressure. Certain ways of breathing. Certain ways of. So it's not just what thoughts you're thinking, but also things you can do. Whether it be movements or rituals or things or prayers, right? And so my aunt taught me this when I was in PA school. Of course, I was actually living with her in New York City, and I was learning all about all these medicines for hypertension. And she was explaining she couldn't take any of those, but she'd learned this other way, this biofeedback, which I thought was really fascinating. Why weren't they teaching us that? If you could figure out exercises and again, things you could try that don't have any side effects, or things you could try that don't have any negative, why not, right? Okay, I only have a couple more things to mention, so I want to pause there for a second. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments, or is any of this, did I skip ahead too fast from the anatomy?
I have a question.
Yeah.
You were talking about the vagus nerve becoming smaller through stress, and that how is there any evidence that it can be built back up?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, a lot of what Deb Dana has seen in her patients is that it can be built back up, for sure. Yeah. And if you think of it this way, Billy, the conventional treatment, if you have Addison's disease and you just aren't making any cortisol at all, right? They typically will give you like a prednisone, but that typical treatment is not going to actually help build the vagus nerve back up. So we try to use like a hydrocortisone would be a conventional approach that's a little more gentle on the body, or glandular adrenal from a pig or a cow, glandular adrenal. So to help with cortisol support, because that also gives us wiggle room to help heal the size of the vagus nerve. So when we're offering a treatment, we also want the treatment to allow healing to happen, not just suppress the healing, right?
So would something like the adrenal support, like that nasty powder that I take, would that help with that process? Because it's
Yes,
adrenal support.
right, but that's a totally different way. The adrenal glandular I was talking about is actually glandular adrenal from a cow or a pig.
Okay.
The adrenal by Jarrow, the powder you're talking about, adrenal cocktail, that is sodium, magnesium, potassium, and vitamin C. And the reason is because when you're burned out from your adrenals, when your adrenals have been in overdrive for more than 20 years, you end up with very low essential elements like magnesium, sodium, potassium. We need those elements to keep our heart healthy and to keep our body healthy, to keep our brain working, right? So they put those in there to replenish you while you're doing other things to heal, right?
Okay.
So if you stay in the same stressful spot, whether it's physically like high blood sugar or or also physically, like I'm in a stressful relationship. If you stay there, it's going to be harder to heal. But if you're working on everything and you've gotten your body and your nervous system to a better place, that adrenal cocktail can be enough to encourage the vagus nerve to get back to its natural size. And there's vitamin C because the adrenal glands save vitamin C in the body, and we can't make vitamin C. So we only can take in vitamin C from our food. It's one vitamin our body cannot make, and the adrenal glands are supposed to save it for us for when we need it. But if they are burnt out, then our vitamin C is chronically low. So they added the vitamin C in there for good reason, because it's an antioxidant that we need if we've had stress. And to be honest, who among us has not had stress, right? Like when we talk about adrenal dysfunction, we're talking about every American I've ever met. I don't know about you all, but do you know the person that has never had stress? I'd like to meet them. And honestly, the other part of this book that she's going to go into a little bit is trauma, the severity of trauma. This is a Gabor Mate principle, is the type of trauma we go through does not dictate how our body responds or how sick we are. So I have patients that were sexually abused from age 5 to age 10, and you'd think that maybe based on that history, their maybe physical complaints might be different than the person who just had a quote lesser trauma, like an emotionally abusive mom who was just giving these micro traumas, right? But it doesn't work that way at all. Our system doesn't really know this logical hierarchy of trauma. And when we have hard things happen, who's with us and how we're able to regulate and co-regulate with the people around us is huge in our healing, right? So I think for me personally, I went through certain things from age 18 to 21 that were awful. Like I had a friend that was killed and hit by a car. That was 9/11. My dad almost died. I had so many things that were really, really terrible. I was raped. I had a long list of things. But yet, when I look back on it, that time of my life, I had the most community. I was living with women my age. I was playing field hockey. I had professional support, but I also had peers that were really great. And for me, what was hard was leaving that community, going out to the real world where you get, a 9 to 5, being out of school and not having that community. And that's when I would have certain things happen and it would affect my nervous system in a totally different way, right? So I think, and you guys probably all have examples of that, like we can endure and even thrive when hard things happen to us. But how we process those hard things is really different from day to day. Sometimes it even could depend on if you have a cycle, where you are in your menstrual cycle, how you're processing this thing that happened, right? Sometimes it can depend on who you have near you. This is why like the death of mom or grandma can really affect us as women, or just grieving women that have died in our family can really affect our health. So that's one thing to think about. And if you haven't heard of Gabor Mate, he's a wonderful researcher who focuses a lot on autoimmune disease in women, which is, of course, most of our patients at our clinic. One other thing I wanted to add there is just related to autoimmune disease and the immune system and the nervous system. We know that if your blood sugar is high, it really impacts your ability to fight infections, right? And so that's kind of like a widely accepted thing in medicine. But what if I told you that stress raises your blood sugar? And again, what I experience as stress may be different than what you experience as stress. So for me, the fact that like this guy in this Jeep tried to run me off the road this morning, that didn't bother me at all. But for you, that might be terrible, right? Depending on your past lived experience or how you interpreted it. And that might make, for example, like a stressful commute in the morning, that might make your blood sugar go up. And if your blood sugar is up for a day or an hour, it's not a problem. It's a good thing. Your body's trying to say, it seems like you're running away from the saber-toothed tiger right now. We're going to help you. We're going to make you really fast, right? But if your blood sugar is high for 10 years, then that's a different conversation, because now you've been depleted of some resources that help with the what I call the calm, rest, and digest part of the nervous system. Now you've been depleted of all of the preventative, like your body's no longer preventing illness. It's just been focused on keeping you alive, right? And the blood sugar being high does damage the nerves. We know that if your blood sugar is too high, it does start to kill the nerves in the body. Again, it's reversible, but that's something to think about. We also know that it's much harder to fight an infection when your blood sugar is high. So if I get strep throat and my blood sugar is high, I'm much more likely to get really sick. And every autoimmune disease is linked to infections. And by that I mean not all the same ones, but for example, like we know Klebsiella is a bacteria that causes an autoimmune spine disease called ankylosing spondylitis. We know Epstein-Barr virus can cause Hashimoto's thyroiditis, right? So there's always an infection or an infectious trigger when we see patients that have autoantibodies. So if you're under stress, you're much more likely to get autoimmune disease for a million reasons, but one of them is your blood sugar has been higher than average or than it should be, and you are more prone to get an infection. And if you don't clear that infection, you're much more likely to have autoimmunity. The other thing that I think is really fascinating is our cortisol is supposed to go pretty high in the morning when we wake up. Within 30 minutes of waking up, it should be at its peak. And then it should slowly come down. It should be pretty normal, middle of the road at noon, and it should go to 0 by bedtime. If that's not working right and our cortisol is 0 in the morning and then goes up at bedtime, what happens is cortisol and melatonin are directly inverse. So if your cortisol is high at bedtime, you don't make melatonin. If your cortisol is 0 at bedtime, you do make melatonin. And we know when you make melatonin, that's one of our antiviral hormones. It's a healing hormone. It's helpful for so many reasons to heal the brain, to heal the immune system. In addition, if your cortisol is high at bedtime and then it goes down in the morning, when you wake up in the morning, you're missing a cortisol cleanup is what I call it. Cortisol goes high, it actually signals the immune system to go around and turn off all of the autoantibodies that it accidentally created when you were sleeping. So I want to point that out because there is a checks and balances of the immune system that prevents us from developing autoimmune disease. And that's gone awry in most of us, right? I've had thyroid antibodies since I was 16. So that's been going haywire for a long time. But what I now understand is that 10 years before that, I wasn't having a cortisol increase in the morning that was actually telling my immune system, hey, we know you made some errors overnight. That's okay. Just go around and fix it and clean it up. So if you don't have that cleanup mechanism because you don't have cortisol in the morning, then you are going to develop autoimmunity eventually. It doesn't happen on day one. Your body can handle a lot of things short term, but long term, that's what happens. And when I learned that, I was fascinated because so many of my patients with autoimmunity had either really poor sleep and lots of insomnia or chronic fatigue syndrome, or they'd had trauma that had affected their cortisol, right? Or sometimes all three. So I think that's really interesting. And the last couple of things, I was actually going to ask if you have the book in front of you, if you want to turn to page 6. I think page 6 that has the ventral vagal, dorsal vagal, sympathetic diagram. I think that's really helpful. I was at a conference, the Medical Academy of Pediatrics and Special Needs 2 weeks ago, and one of the lecturers put this up on the board. And the reason he did, even though we were talking about herbs and treatment for Lyme in kids, the reason he put this on the board is because he wanted to show us the bottom, the dorsal vagal. This is where a lot of our kids with autism are stuck. So a lot of them are in a little bit of a shutdown. They are drained of energy. You can see that they're disconnected, right? Maybe a better example for this age group would just be to think about like that the postmenopausal woman who's having some low level depression, and it's there and all of your friends have it and everyone thinks it's normal, but it's not normal, right? That's actually what we consider in polyvagal theory. This is what we call dorsal vagal. So it means you've been overloaded, and many years ago your body was like, we can't do this. We cannot process all of this stuff. We're gonna just go numb, right? Josh, my partner, has had just a very interesting life, but he became a medic. He became an EMT at 15 and a medic at 21. And the things he saw in his 20s were really horrific. And he responds amazingly well when something's going wrong, but it's numb. Does that make sense? If you think about the medic who is saving somebody's life, they're not feeling the very grave emotions that might go through your body when you realize you are the only person that can save this person, and sometimes you don't save people, right? So Josh talks about what that feels like as he's healing, because he's 47 now. And he's realized that being numb is not actually where he wants to be, right? So that bottom part, that dorsal vagal, it doesn't feel so good anymore, especially when we get to midlife. It starts to feel like we're missing some joy. We're missing some ability to see the beauty in the life that we've worked so hard to build, right? And this can be what we call depression, in my opinion, in the typical clinic. It's not. We've gone through so much that we are shut down because we just can't process anything else, right? And that's okay. That's actually been the thing that's gotten us to here and the reason we're still alive. So there's no good or bad, right? And then one step up, as we're healing, what we consider to be the next step, which is a little confusing because this is different, is the sympathetic. So sympathetic is what we consider the person who's having road rage on the road, who you cut in front of them by accident and they get out of the car and start screaming at you. That's sympathetic. But it's considered a rung of the ladder higher than the shutdown phase. So you might see that person screaming on the road and think that is not a healthy person. But it might be part of their journey of healing to feel everything a lot before they can become regulated. And the final step is the ventral vagal. Ventral vagal is why we're reading this book. It is the point we're trying to get to here. It doesn't mean that when we get to ventral vagal, which is grounded or calm or anchored, it doesn't mean we stay there though. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example and then I will stop talking and give time for questions. I've had, 17 different ways of healing my traumas in the last 6 years. I've done EMDR. I even had an experience with psychedelics. I've had hypnosis. I saw a shaman at one point. I've gone to dance class. I've had something called transforming touch done and some visceral manipulation. So I've been willing to try things if they fit at the moment and it resonates with me, if it feels like a good idea, right? I haven't tried everything. There's a lot of things I haven't tried, but I'm always trying to think of ways to heal for myself. But I also feel very healthy. So I want to put that out there. I feel both, right? I feel like, there might be ways to feel better, but I also do look in the mirror and like wake up in the morning and say, Kate, you're doing a great job, right? It's both. Because I want my kids to see that too, that you can have autoimmune disease and you can also live a really healthy life, because both my kids have autoimmune disease. And I had 3 weeks I was super regulated, like 3 weeks of, I'm so happy and nothing's bothering me. And even when little bumps come in the road, we handle them great. And then something happened on Tuesday where there was an issue at work with blood work that was supposed to be processed and it wasn't. Brandy's going to laugh because she knows what I'm talking about. And I was driving to get my kiddo from school to bring them back for an orchestra concert, and I realized that I was not in ventral vagal, which was, first of all, huge win for me, because when you notice the state you're in, you've already done a lot of the work, because you've noticed, you have checked in with yourself, right? As a kid, I wasn't taught those skills to check in with my body or to believe my emotions. So I've come a long way, because as I'm driving, I'm like, oh, I'm really upset about this thing, this mishap that was a total honest mistake, right? And then I did two things. The first thing was I did something called Ho'oponopono, which is basically, I love Debbie smiling, right? I said to the person who made the mistake, I love you and I forgive you. And then I said to me, Kate, I love you and I forgive you. Again, the person, I love you and I forgive you. To me, the person, I love you. To me, I love you and I forgive you. I did it 3 times. I took a breath. And then, and this is just automatic now. I was so impressed with myself, I had to share it with you. The second thing I did was I did something called the Byron Katie method. And I went, Kate, that thought you just had about this blood work, the fact that it wasn't done, it's terrible news. It's the end of the world. Is that thought true? Okay, maybe it's true. And then the second question you ask is it absolutely true? And I went, okay, no, maybe it's not, no. And then the third question is, how do you feel when you have that thought? And I get to check in with my organs, check in with my breathing, check in with my belly. What emotion do I feel? Oh, I feel heartbreak for this kid who has to go through this blood draw again, right? Pause there. Allow yourself to feel it. Because what we've learned in yoga is when we try to move through it too fast, we miss it, right? We're trying to go over it instead of through. We do need to pause for a moment to let ourselves feel things. So for me, it was 30 seconds of like, oh, my heart breaks for this kid. Wow, that really hurts, you know? And then the last question is either what's the opposite of this thought you had, or how do you feel if you think the opposite thought? So the opposite thought is, maybe this isn't such a big deal, or in this case, you know, this isn't going to end well. What's the opposite? Oh, this is actually going to have a good outcome. And so I did those 2 exercises, the I forgive you, I love you, I forgive me, I love me. And then I also did this Byron Katie. And I don't want to lie to you. It's only 9 minutes to my kids' school, even less. I didn't arrive in that car line 100% in ventral vagal, but I was really, really close, right? And now my 15-year-old gets in the car and I can say, hey, how was your day, right? Instead of like all the other stuff that was going through. And I don't know, maybe I am naive and idealistic. It's possible. But I think that if all the moms of all the teens had access to these tools, and all these teens grew up with these really present, grounded moms, we could change the whole world. We could have a generation of adults that knew how to access calm and knew how to feel their feelings, right? Because teenagers don't listen to us lecture, but they do notice what we're doing. They do see what we model, and we're no longer able to tell them what to do, but they do accidentally pick up on some clues of what we're doing. You know what I mean? Okay. The only other thing I wanted to chat about was co-regulation, but I think we'll kind of jump in. Chapter 1, she talks about co-regulation, which is a term we're going to talk about a lot. The reason I think we heal faster sometimes in community is because of this idea of co-regulation. So if you are sitting with me in the office for your visit, or you're sitting with Sophie for your visit, and your provider seems really regulated and really calm, I do think you come out of that room feeling more calm yourself, right? Same thing if you're married and you have a partner. If your partner's in a tizzy, it can really affect you, right? And if you have a really calm partner who's grounded, it can really help you access grounding, because we are social beings, right? We are animals that live together on purpose. You know, when you see a baby breastfeed and just want to lie and curl up and sleep next to their mom, that's survival instinct. We still have that as adults. We just want to cuddle. So the co-regulation part is big, but you don't have to get co-regulation just from other human beings, right? My dog is so good at co-regulating me. The trees in my backyard, I have like 3 trees total because I live in the city, but those trees are good at co-regulating me. My little tiny, I have like little nettle plants growing. I just kind of say hi to them in the morning, you know, like nature can co-regulate us, sometimes even better than humans. So when we talk about co-regulation, and Deb Dana is going to go into it a little bit in chapter 1, I want you to think about not just humans, but also animals and nature and other ways to co-regulate. I think with that, I will end the recording. I'm gonna ask that between now and the next time we meet, that you read the intro and chapter 1, if you haven't already. If you already read the intro in chapter 1, please read it again. I think reading it again, you get a whole different sense. Maybe you catch some things you didn't the first time. And then if you have 5 more minutes, I have time, I can hang out and answer any questions, but let me end the recording.